Shadow of the Colossus' setting is one of the most fascinating virtual environments I've ever seen in a video game. It's amazing how such a sparse and mostly uninhabited landscape can also be so evocative. I've spent hours just wandering around in this game, exploring side areas that have no explicit in-game purpose except to make the setting feel more complete. At times, the Forbidden Lands almost feel like a real place. And in a way, they are. Although Fumito Ueda's games are notoriously vague and light on backstory, the appearance of the human inhabitants of this world, the art style of the Colossi, and the topography of the landscape all point to a real-world basis for the events of Shadow of the Colossus. But where could it be? The world we live on is pretty big, after all, so there are lots of possibilities. Let's narrow them down a little. We'll start with the obvious. The Forbidden Lands clearly aren't anywhere in the Arctic or Antarctic. In fact, there isn't even snow or ice in the game at all. Similarly, we can rule out the tropics and subtropics entirely. The climate in the Forbidden Lands is clearly temperate, with a scattering of deciduous forest and large expanses of open grassland. The grass is green, too, not brown or yellow as it would be throughout most of Africa. This narrows our search considerably, but we still have a lot left to sift through. At this point, we could be anywhere in North America or Europe, as well as most of Asia. And, technically, Tierra del Fuego. So let's switch to a new tack by examining our strongest positive piece of evidence, Wander himself. We actually know a surprising amount of useful information about Wander when it comes to placing him geographically. He rides a horse, is skilled in both swordplay and archery, walks around on sandals, and wears a cloth shirt and short pants covered by a long serape-like shawl. But honestly, the first thing anyone probably notices about him is that he has light red hair and bluish-gray eyes. Red hair is not a common trait. It's found in less than 2% of the Earth's population, and this means that Wander definitely doesn't belong to the vast majority of ethnic groups inhabiting North America, Europe, or Asia. Historically speaking, people with red hair come almost entirely from this part of Eurasia, consisting more or less of the countries between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So based on all this evidence, I'm pretty confident in saying that Wander, our protagonist, is a Scythian. What's a Scythian, you might be asking? Well, they were a nomadic tribe who stepped into history a couple of thousand years ago in an area centered on modern Ukraine. They spoke an Eastern Iranian language, likely practiced an animistic religion involving sun worship and animal sacrifice. Sound familiar? And were known for their warlike nature and consummate skill in riding and archery. In the 5th century BC, Hippocrates noted their pale skin. In later centuries, other writers, including Pliny the Elder, added that they tended to have red hair and bluish-gray eyes. But I'm not done yet. There's also the evidence of Scythian art, which almost universally featured carved animals. Take a look at some of these things. Do they look familiar? They should if you've played Shadow of the Colossus. Artworks like this were one of 3 things that the Scythians usually had buried with them in their funeral mounds or kurgans. No, not that kind of kurgan. This kind. The other 2 things, by the way, they were weapons and horse harnesses. This is a tradition that's also shared with the Celts, so you might wonder why I don't think Wander is Celtic. Well, first of all, most Celtic art features elaborate geometrical designs and not animals. But I have another reason for my theory, and to find it, all we have to do is zoom in on the map. Zoom in on the map. See that bit of land sticking out into the Black Sea? That is the Crimea, a peninsula that extends southward from the Ukraine. At various times throughout history, it's been conquered by the Greek, Persian, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, and Russian empires, as well as a slew of barbarian tribes like the Alans, the Huns, the Mongols, the Goths, the Cimmerians, and yes, the Scythians. It's been more or less a giant battleground for nearly 3 millennia. But more importantly for our purposes, it also has a very familiar shape. Perhaps you've noticed it. No? Well, how about now? This completely blew my mind when I first noticed it. Obviously, it's not an exact match, either in shape or in size. The real Crimea, for instance, is about 100 miles on a side, while the Forbidden Lands are more like 2. But the resemblance is downright uncanny. It has forests and rivers in almost exactly the right places, and even a desert, the Oleshki Sands, in practically the same region as the large central desert found in Shadow of the Colossus. I can sense that some of you are still a little skeptical. Hold on, I hear you saying. So if Wander is a barbarian nomad, and the Colossi are based on barbarian art, then where did all these ginormous ancient ruins come from? Nomads don't build palaces, they just build giant dirt piles with dead people and jewelry in them. Now that's absolutely correct. And no, I don't believe that the tribe which Wander belongs to built any of these enormous structures. I think they were built by a sedentary agricultural society that inhabited the Forbidden Lands a long time ago, possibly before they became forbidden, namely, the ancient Greeks. Hear me out for a second. The ancient Greeks had colonies all over the damn place, so much so that Greek culture dominated these places for centuries even after they were made part of the Roman Empire. These colonies included a number of Greek towns established in the Crimea. Several of these even match up to places in the game world where you fight the Colossi. Does this mean I'm saying the Colossi weren't made by the same people who made the buildings where you find them? Actually, yes. When you think about it, very few of the Colossi actually seem to match their surroundings. Most of the ones you fight indoors are way too big to move around comfortably in these enclosed areas. The rooms feel more like cages than places designed for them to live in. They also don't match aesthetically. You would think that a country with both huge mythical creatures and palatial architecture would represent these creatures through some kind of art. But in fact, there's no representational art in Shadow of the Colossus at all, besides the Hall of Statues in the main temple, which may not actually be man-made. I have a theory, and I know this is going way out on a limb, but here goes. There was once an ancient civilization living in the Forbidden Lands. I call them Greeks, but obviously they don't have to be. These people built the palaces and shrines that Wander encounters throughout the game. Dorman was a spirit worshipped by this civilization, which explains the prominence of Dorman's temple and its lack of resemblance to the Colossi. Sometime long before Wander was born, his tribe invaded this territory and laid waste to it. Obviously, any civilization protected by Dorman would be a difficult one to conquer, so the Scythians conjured up their own spirits to counter it. These were the Colossi. Against these 16 creatures, Dorman could do nothing. He was forced to sit back and watch while they destroyed everything around him. Then, their mission complete, they stopped in their tracks and waited. However, Dorman could strike back against the people who had summoned the Colossi, and he inflicted such terrible casualties on them that they were forced to retreat back to their homeland. Realizing that the Colossi had gone too far and destroyed all the cities they were trying to conquer, the Scythians abandoned the Forbidden Lands and told the rest of the tribe never to go there. Not only was it a worthless husk now, but Dorman was also still there, presumably scheming to take revenge. Wander would have grown up knowing nothing about this ancient war, but he would have heard about Dorman and the awesome power he possessed. After Mono's sacrifice, he was so filled with remorse that he determined to seek out Dorman and find a way to bring her back, taking with him a magical sword that belonged to his tribe. It would make sense that the Scythians, having summoned the Colossi in the first place, would also possess the only means of destroying them. This would explain why Dorman is so eager to have Wander kill the Colossi, and why their presence could act as a kind of lock on his full power. It also, in a way, explains what happens to Wander after he kills each Colossus. You see, one of the Scythians' primary gods was Mithra, a sun god who also oversaw the making of oaths and covenants. Oath-breaking was considered a heinous crime by the Scythians, one that would be punished by the gods. So when Wander kills the spirits who had originally been summoned by his ancestors, he's breaking the covenant that existed between the two. This would also explain why so many Colossi do not attack Wander on sight. As far as they're concerned, he's an ally and not an enemy. They may even be waiting for orders. This would explain why they appear when he's close, but usually just wander around doing nothing. He has to attack them first, and then they attack him in retaliation. And last but not least, what about Mono? Well, it's possible that she's a descendant of the civilization once protected by Dorman. It would explain the strong physical contrast between her and Wander, and why his tribe sacrificed her in the first place. Scythians were believed to have practiced human sacrifice at some point in history. This would also explain why Dorman, who seems to have very few qualms about attacking humans, leaves her completely alone and is willing to revive her at the end. Perhaps this was actually the outcome Dorman wanted to begin with. Obviously, this is all major speculation. All of this could be absolutely coincidental. Maybe Fumito Ueda just gave Wander red hair and gray eyes because it makes him more unique. Maybe the Colossi really are supposed to have some deep connection to the monumental architecture, and I'm just too dense to see it. I could be wrong about literally everything I've said here, and knowing Ueda and his love of vagueness, we'll probably never know exactly what Shadow of the Colossus is all about. Either way, I'd like to know what you think. If you had to place Wander in the events of Shadow of the Colossus somewhere in the real world, where would you put him? What's your take on this game's evocative story and atmosphere? If you have a more coherent take than mine, I'd love to hear it. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled video.